You rarely see pundits on TV talking about the value of Medicare for all. You see a lot of people criticizing Medicare for all. You don't see the people talking about the value of canceling all student debt. You see people criticizing it.
Bernie Sanders campaign manager Faz Shakir was on CNN with Brian Stelter discussing media bias. Now, before I get to these clips, I do have to say that Brian Stelter is, at least in the context of cable news, he is one of the better people on television because he's had actual progressives on like Anna Kasparian, Cenk Uygur. He's willing to have these discussions and be challenged on media bias. And you're going to see that here. So Faz Shakir begins with a discussion about the upcoming debate.
Do you have expectations for this debate versus NBC's debates? Were there problems with NBC other than those technical glitches, for example?
Brian, I'm going to make a radical comment. This isn't a criticism of CNN. It's really a criticism of the media environment. But I believe these debates tend to make the American people stupider. They're performative theater, and we don't end up having the conversations that affect people's lives. So I don't have super high expectations. I think we're going to try to go through it and answer the questions, respond to Donald Trump's tweets and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, this isn't, I think, how you win a campaign.
All right, so I thought this was a very solid take here from Faz Shakir, something you would not normally, if ever, hear from a campaign manager of any presidential campaign, that debates actually hurt the discussion. I do think that is true, but I think there's a way to fix it. So the way he's discussing it here, I mean, when you look at how the debates are set up, you're talking about a system here where the media is very focused on making this entire primary process entertainment. So as we saw on MSNBC or NBC, and as we're going to see on the CNN debates this week, the way they're going to have a lot of these questions set up is they're going to make it sort of a, they're going to try and pit candidates against each other. I guarantee you, there's going to be a question trying to pit Warren and Sanders against each other. Part of the reason is they're trying to split this progressive vote. But another part of the reason is they want entertainment. And for them, this is how they create this entertainment. But there are ways to actually fix the debate process. And the most important way they could fix the debates is by taking out the audience. A lot of these politicians, as we saw in the first couple debates, a lot of these politicians play to the audience. They play for applause lines because they know that looks well on television. If you're watching TV and someone, Kamala Harris starts hitting Joe Biden or says something where she gets an applause line, that is a boon for that campaign. Even if there is no substance in what she is saying, it's the performance of it that gets her the applause line and in turn helps her campaign. If you take out the audience, what you were then forced to do is actually focus on the issues. You're forced to actually focus on the policies, focus on these candidates' records, how they have voted in the past, and also focus on who is supporting each of these candidates. Like, who are their big donors? Do they have big donors? Are they relying on small donors instead? How many volunteers do they have? How many individual donors do they have? Who do these candidates actually represent? Those are the kind of questions you actually get to dive into if you take out the audience and don't turn the debates into entertainment. Let's get to the second clip here where Faz talks about the Bernie Sanders critique of corporate media.
What is the heart of the critique about what Sanders calls the corporate media? What do you want people like me to do differently?
Well, Brian, this isn't a personal commentary on you or any other journalist. There's many wonderful, talented journalists out there. But in about, a minute or so or 2 minutes or so, you're going to cut to commercial breaks and you're going to see some pharmaceutical ads. You're going to see a lot of ads that are basically paying your bills and the bills of this the entire media enterprise. And what that ends up doing is incentivizing you and others to make sure that you're asking the questions and driving the conversations in certain areas and not in certain areas. Right now, Bernie Sanders is on a bus across.
What evidence do you have of that? I don't actually know what ads run during the breaks. I actually don't see the commercials. I don't know what runs.
And I reached out to Phil Griffin, the head of MSNBC, and happy to talk to Jeff Zucker and others. It isn't about you, Brian, but about how these media structures are set and operated and the biases that I believe are embedded within them about what they
really
decide are segments worthy.
Right.
Are what segments worthy of covering and what aren't.
So I think it's important to point out here that Faz Shakir, before he joined the Bernie Sanders campaign as the campaign manager, He worked for the ACLU as the National Policy Director. This was somebody who was on the front lines fighting the Trump administration, suing the Trump administration in various cases, trying to ensure that the Trump administration is actually following the law. And when they are trying to implement something like the Muslim ban, that they are challenged on that. So Faz Shakir isn't just, some random dude who's looking for a paycheck. He actually has a history of being an activist. He has a history of fighting. So when you see him, on television talking about this, there is real substance to what he is saying. What he is saying here is exactly correct. The mass media needs money to survive. I mean, the entire corporate media is built on a capitalist system. So of course, they're going to be concerned about someone like Bernie Sanders, who is challenging that system, challenging that wealth, challenging that concentrated power. So they're not going to cover Bernie Sanders properly, as you have seen. And we're going to get to some examples in the next clip here. But another part of this is the company culture. So I'm sure Brian Stelter doesn't know what ads are on there. That part doesn't matter. It's the company culture. It's who its producers are. What is seen as acceptable on television in terms of what kinds of questions to ask, what the framing should be around certain issues. This is all within this bubble of CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. They have their various bubbles, and their various bubbles always, regardless of if it's liberal or conservative, their bubbles always are subservient to the company culture, which is engrossed in ad revenue. So they are not going to challenge Big Pharma in the same way that Bernie Sanders does, because they rely on Big Pharma for a lot of money, just as one example. But you watch these shows, you see these ads. It's of course going to have an effect on their content. Now, the other aspect here, of course, is just the fact that these hosts, most of them, many of them, are millionaires. That's who's presenting you the news. These wealthy people who already have it great, don't really have any reason to question the system because it's benefited them. Now, a lot of times, as I said, it's not necessarily the hosts that are the ones pushing certain narratives, but it's also behind the scenes. They're producers, what that culture is like. So the idea that you expect these people on television who are making lots and lots of money, that they're going to have your best interests at heart, when historically, I mean, at least as we've seen the past several years, now that they are actually being challenged on their wealth, on their power, they are very, very rarely do they allow that debate on television. So I will say, I mean, CNN is better than most. CNN at least has, Chris Cuomo has Cenk Uygur on a consistent basis. They had Nina Turner on in the past. They even have Abdul El Sayed on occasionally on the Sunday show. So there is occasionally that voice on there, but it's rare. And if there's one of them, then there's going to be three other people who are arguing the opposite or continuing to argue for the status quo, while you have maybe at best the one progressive on the panel discussing how maybe Medicare for all is a good idea. Maybe reining in private interests and this profit motive, this profit motivated healthcare industry, maybe reining that in and focusing on people over profits is a good idea. But that discussion is rare. Let me go to the last clip here where Faz talks about what's not being covered on television.
So what do you think is not being covered that needs to be covered more? What are those topic areas?
Well, I mean, one classic area, of course, is, we're going across the border right now to talk about prescription drugs. Do you know why you pay so much more, 10 times more in America on prescription drugs than any other country? Does anyone know that or understand why? Do you know what the Trump administration is doing about that? Do you even know who the head of the Health and Human Services Secretary is? Do you know his background, that he worked in the pharmaceutical industry? I mean, I think Donald Trump turns out these tweets and attempts to distract all of us, and there isn't a basic conversation around the fact that he's betraying the working class by having selected a group of people to run his government who come from industry, who benefit industry, and that story is not told. And
but
why
don't
is
you
that
know
story
all that
not
from
told?
the press?
I mean,
don't you know all that from reporting?
No, that's not how I know it. I've done my own research. We've done our own research to know
by
it.
reading stories, by
there's
reading news
probably
stories
a few
about
segments. Yeah, and I would argue to you, and you know this well, Brian, that TV is a certain medium that has an influential power, and I'm making more of a critique here of what TV media decides to cover. and it tends to be a game. It tends to be a gotcha. I appreciate that Donald Trump's tweets are important, and we'll have a conversation about that, but it also belies a conversation that he doesn't want to have. And I think that that's what I think me, Bernie Sanders, a lot of us feel gets obfuscated, is that the things that affect real Americans' lives.
Right, many viewers agree with you. This shiny objects, the sensationalism, it's a problem. The question is whether it's, I think, effective for you all to call it out. Maybe it is. Trump has won support from his fans by attacking the media. Maybe that's what you think will work as well.
So we're not playing a game here, all right? It is truly based out of conviction and sincerity that we do see biases operating against the campaign, but also against the issues we care deeply about. You rarely see pundits on TV talking about the value of Medicare for all. You see a lot of people criticizing Medicare for all. You don't see the people talking about the value of canceling all student debt. You see people criticizing it. And why is that, right? Just ask yourself. You're taking on corporate power. You're taking on the establishment across the board. And all we're arguing for is, can we have a fair shake?
So those last two examples there that Faz Shakir pulls out are exactly the perfect examples to showcase to you how the media frames certain issues. On Medicare for All, how often do you see a discussion about the benefits of Medicare for All? I mean, any policy that actually looks to help the vast majority of people, because that same policy also challenges existing corporate power, then it's a policy they're going to be hypercritical of when they are discussing it, whether it's Medicare for all, whether it's eliminating student debt. I mean, eliminating student debt would be a huge boon to the economy, allow so many people the freedom to begin to actually reinvest into their own lives, and simply for the crime of, going to school and learning more. So this idea that, eliminating student loan debt is crazy when you just saw this tax cut for millionaires and billionaires and massive corporations. The idea that giving the average person debt relief is a scary idea is absurd. But you don't see these discussions on television because, again, it's the culture. These massive media companies. Of course, a massive corporation is not going to be open to the idea of forgiving student loan debt at the expense of Wall Street, or bringing in Medicare for all at the expense of private insurance companies. So that again, give them ad revenue. So this is what is wrong. And I don't know why Brian plays dumb here, where he's, he talks to, Faz Shakir saying, well, didn't you learn that from an article? Yeah, obviously TV is a little different. So yes, even the Washington Post or the New York Times will have the occasional op-ed from Bernie Sanders or a progressive. That happens. But when we are talking about the vast majority of articles, it is not that. Or when we are talking about especially cable news, as Faz Shakir points out here, it is definitely not that. There are certain narratives, and TV has a certain ability to take in people who aren't reading news articles, aren't actually engaging in the this battle of ideas, for a lack of a better term. So television here has a unique opportunity to educate people. But instead, they use that opportunity to instead entertain people. And that's what they've turned politics into, entertainment.